So, what does a Bach fugue, an optical illusion of a never-ending staircase, and a completely universe-breaking mathematical paradox actually have in common?
Right, on the surface, you'd think absolutely nothing.
Literally nothing. But if you dig deep enough into all three of those things, you find the exact same secret blueprint.
And remarkably, that blueprint happens to be the literal reason you have a personality.
Yeah, it is honestly the most profound, deeply weird mystery in the entire universe. And it's just, sitting right there inside your skull.
It really is.
Because think about it. If you take a human brain and you look at it under a microscope, what do you actually see? You see a lump of gray matter.
You see cells, just physical stuff.
Right. Neurons, synapses, chemicals, neurotransmitters, and every single one of those microscopic parts is completely, unequivocally unconscious.
Yeah, a single molecule doesn't have hopes. A solitary neuron doesn't, have a sense of humor.
Exactly. They're just tiny, mindless biological machines, right?
Right.
Following the rigid, deterministic laws of physics and chemistry.
They're essentially just tiny valves. I mean, they shunt potassium and sodium ions back and forth across a membrane. That's it.
So they're just rule-following mechanisms, completely devoid of any inner life.
Zero awareness,
Yeah.
zero intentionality.
And yet somehow, when you pack 100 billion of those totally meaningless little biological valves together in a, very specific configuration,
The lights come on.
the lights come on, the lump of meat wakes up, it looks around the room, it experiences the vibrant color red, it feels love and terror.
And most miraculously of all, it realizes it's an I.
Yes. It points to itself and says, I exist. Like, how on earth do entirely meaningless parts combine to create meaning?
How does unconscious hardware boot up conscious software? That is, it's the ultimate question.
It really is. And mapping out that specific architecture is our mission for this deep dive.
We're tackling the hard problem of cognitive science, philosophy, and biology, all intersecting at one single point.
Right. By diving into the masterwork of Douglas Hofstadter. His book, Gödel, Escher, Bach. And I want to be clear, we aren't just going to give you a book report today.
No, that wouldn't do it justice.
Our mission is to actually build a coherent mental model in your mind of how these seemingly unrelated fields like art, music, math, computer science, how they all point toward the same secret of human consciousness.
We want to find out what you actually are.
So to navigate this, we have to orient ourselves around three specific historical figures, right?
Yeah, they basically act as the structural pillars for this entire journey.
Okay, so who's the first one?
First, we have Johann Sebastian Bach. He represents music. But we aren't talking about simple lullabies here.
Right.
We're talking specifically about his fugues and canons. Take pieces like the Musical Offering, which actually has this fascinating origin story.
Oh, right, with the King of Prussia.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Bach was visiting King Frederick the Great, and the king, who wanted to test the great composer, handed Bach this bizarre, highly complex musical theme.
Just on the spot.
On the spot. And he improvised a 3-part fugue right then and there.
Okay, wait, let me stop you there. Because for those of us who aren't, classical musicians, the word fugue gets thrown around a lot. What actually makes a fugue different from just a normal piece of music?
Sure. So a standard song usually has a clear melody on top, right? And then a chord progression underneath that supports it.
Like a singer and a guitar.
Exactly. But a fugue is entirely different. It relies on counterpoint.
Yeah.
You have multiple independent melodic lines, they call them voices, that are introduced one by one.
Okay.
So the first voice introduces the theme. Then a second voice enters with that exact same theme, but maybe it's shifted to a different pitch.
Well, the first voice is still playing.
Yes. While the first voice continues with totally new material, then a third voice enters.
Oh, wow. That sounds incredibly complicated.
It is. Bach's absolute genius was in taking these mathematical transformations of a single theme, like playing it upside down or playing it backwards or stretching it out.
And he weaves them all together.
Right? Weaving them perfectly so they form this beautiful cohesive whole. The voices intertwine, they loop back on themselves, and they create this dense structural web.
Okay, so Bach is our first pillar, representing these complex, looping musical structures. Who's the second?
Next is M.C. Escher, the Dutch graphic artist.
Oh, man. Anyone who has ever been in a college dorm has probably seen his work.
Definitely. He represents visual art. He is the undisputed master of impossible optical illusions.
Like the staircases, right?
Yeah, staircases that seem to go up and up forever, wrapping all the way around a courtyard, but somehow...
They end up exactly on the same level where they started.
Exactly. Or waterfalls that clearly flow downwards, turning a water wheel, only to form a closed loop that feeds right back into the top of the waterfall.
And there's also that famous lithograph drawing hands.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
Yeah, where a left hand is holding a pencil and it's sketching the cuff of a right hand. But the right hand is also hooking a pencil and it's actively sketching the left hand.
Right. Each hand is bringing the other into existence on a flat two-dimensional piece of paper.
It's a total paradox.
The visual paradox is crucial. And that brings us to our third pillar, Kurt Gödel. He represents mathematics and logic.
Okay, the math guy.
In 1931, Gödel was this young Austrian mathematician who did something almost unthinkable. He essentially broke mathematics by turning it back on itself.
He broke math.
He discovered this unavoidable limitation in the very nature of rigid logical systems. He mathematically proved that logic cannot prove everything.
Okay, so, I understand how math, logic, and computer science might relate to the mechanics of the human brain, right? Like, the brain computes, computers compute.
Sure.
But why music and art? What do a Baroque composer writing music for a Prussian king and a Dutch illusionist drawing impossible staircases have to do with cognitive science?
I know it sounds like a stretch.
It really does. Like, what does that have to do with the biological reality of your consciousness?
It's because Bach, Escher, and Gödel all independently discovered, in their own distinct languages, the exact same fundamental structure.
Which is?
Bach found it in musical pitch and rhythm, Escher found it in geometry and perspective, and Gödel found it in number theory. Hofstadter calls this structure the strange loop.
A strange loop?
Okay. A strange loop occurs whenever, by moving upwards or downwards through the hierarchical levels of some system, you unexpectedly find yourself right back where you started.
Like the endlessly rising staircase.
Precisely. It's a tangled hierarchy. The top level drives the bottom level, but the bottom level forms the top level.
Okay, so it's a loop that crosses its own boundaries.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what we're going to discover as we unpack this today is that a strange loop isn't just a neat trick of art or math.
Right.
It is the exact literal mechanism that allows that lump of meat in your head to become self-aware. You, the listener, your very sense of I, is a strange loop.
That is just, wow. Okay, so to understand how a strange loop generates consciousness, we have to kind of strip everything away, right?
We have to start at the absolute bottom.
We have to start with systems that have zero consciousness, zero intelligence, and zero meaning. We need to look at what logicians call a formal system.
Right. Before we can even begin to understand the messy, wet biology of the brain, we have to understand systems of pure rules.
Okay, so define a formal system for me.
A formal system is, at its core, just a set of completely meaningless symbols and a set of rigid typographical rules for moving those symbols around.
Typographical rules, like just manipulating shapes on a page?
Exactly. Think of it like a machine that only knows how to follow instructions, without having any clue what those instructions mean.
It doesn't care about the outcome.
Not at all. It only cares about the physical shape of the symbols.
All right, let's make this incredibly concrete for the listener. I want to play a game with you.
Let's do it.
The book uses this classic formal system called the MU puzzle. So imagine you have a piece of blank paper and you write down a string of letters. But in this specific universe, the only letters that exist are M, I, and U.
Okay, I've got my mental paper ready. Those are my only symbols. M, I, and U.
Great. Now, I'm going to give you a starting string. This is your axiom. Your starting string is simply two letters, M, I.
Okay, M, I.
Now, the goal of the game is to use 4 strict rules to change that string step by step until you end up with the string M, U. Just M and U.
Sounds straightforward enough. What are the allowed rules?
All right, rule 1, if your string ends in an I, you can add a U to the end. So if you have MI, you can turn it into MIU.
Got it.
Rule 2, if you have a string that starts with M, you can double whatever comes after the M.
Okay, so if I have MI, I can double the I and get MII.
Exactly. Or if
Yeah.
you have MIU, you can double the IU and get MIUIU.
Makes sense.
Rule 3, if you ever have 3 I's in a row, so I3, you can replace them with a single U.
Okay, so MIU could become MUI, or it could become MIU, depending on which 3 I's I swap out.
Spot on. And finally, rule 4, if you ever have 2 U's in a row U, you can just delete them entirely.
All right, let me test my understanding here by actually trying to solve it.
Go for it. You want to turn MI into MU.
Right, so I'll start with MI. I can't really use rule 1 because that would give me MIU, and I need just MU.
Right.
So I'll use rule 2 to double the I. Now I have MAI. Please rule 2 again. Now I have MEI 3. Okay, rule 3 says I can replace 3 I's with a U. So I'll replace the first 3 I's. Now I have MUI.
Escher. Now you have a problem.
I do. I have an I at the end, and I really want to get rid of it.
So what do you do?
Well, I look at the rules. Rule 1 lets me add a U, making it MUIU. Rule 2 lets me double the UI, making it MUIUIU. Rule 3 doesn't apply because I don't have 3 I's. And Rule 4 doesn't apply because I don't have 2 U's.
So you're stuck.
I am completely stuck. There's literally no rule to just drop an I.
So as a human being with intelligence, your instinct is probably to say, well, the goal is MU, and I have MUI. The I is in the way. I'll just, cross it out.
Yeah, that's what I want to do.
Right.
But I can't do that because that violates the requirement of formality.
The requirement of formality. And this is the bedrock of computer science, right? And the biological foundation of the brain.
Exactly. When you're operating within a formal system, you must act like a mindless machine. You cannot use outside logic.
You can't care about the goal.
You're just shunting meaningless symbols around on a page based purely on their typographical shape.
Because a neuron doesn't know it's trying to help you catch a baseball.
Not at all. It just receives chemical signals from its neighbors, the electrical potential across its membrane changes, and based entirely on the rigid laws of physics, it either fires an action potential or it doesn't.
It operates strictly on the requirement of formality.
Yes. The symbols in our MU puzzle don't mean anything. MI and U have no secret translation. They are literally just shapes.
Which brings us to the core mystery here. If everything at the bottom level, the neurons, the rules, the ink on the page, is entirely meaningless, how does meaning ever enter the picture?
Right.
Because my brain clearly possesses meaning. I understand concepts. I love my family.
To bridge that gap, we need to look at another formal system. Let's look at what's called the PQ system.
Okay, lay it on me. Hit me with the rules of the PQ system.
It's even simpler than the MU puzzle. It uses only 3 shapes: the letter P, the letter Q, and hyphens. That's it.
Okay, P, Q, and hyphens.
Now imagine I'm a machine blindly following typographical rules, and I output a valid string from this system. It looks like this: 2 hyphens, then a P, then 3 hyphens, then a Q, then 5 hyphens.
So the physical string on the page is hyphen P, hyphen, 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 hyphen.
Exactly. And just looking at that string, it's entirely meaningless. It's just a typographical pattern generated by a rigid rule set.
But if I stare at that long enough, a pattern emerges.
Oh.
Yeah. 2 hyphens, a P, 3 hyphens, a Q, 5 hyphens, 2, 3, 5.
Okay.
If I map those hyphens to numbers, I have 2, 3, and 5. And the relationship between those numbers is, incredibly obvious. 2 plus 3 equals 5.
You just made a massive conceptual leap. What if the letter P stands for plus?
And what if the letter Q stands for equals?
Exactly. If we map those specific human concepts onto those meaningless typographical shapes, then our completely abstract string suddenly says 2 plus 3 equal 5.
The shapes have magically transformed into a true mathematical statement.
The transformation you just experienced is called an isomorphism.
An isomorphism.
Yes. It's an information-preserving structural mapping between 2 entirely different things. We mapped the rigid physical rules of the PQ system onto the conceptual truths of arithmetic. The system behaves exactly as addition behaves.
But, and this is a distinction that really took me a minute to wrap my head around, the symbols themselves still don't inherently mean anything.
No, they don't.
Like the letter P doesn't know it means plus. The system itself doesn't know a single thing about math.
And you've just hit on the difference between active and passive meaning.
Okay, break that down for me.
The formal system, the ink on the page, is entirely passive. It just sits there obeying its rules. The meaning doesn't live in the ink. The meaning lives in the isomorphism.
Ah, so is our intelligence observing the system from the outside that reads the meaning into it?
Yes, because we recognize the structural similarity between the rules of the system and the rules of reality.
The system perfectly mirrors reality, so we assign it meaning. And this is exactly how we have to think about the human brain at its lowest microscopic level.
Right.
The neurons in your visual cortex are like the hyphens and the P's and Q's. They are just firing in patterns. They don't inherently possess the meaning of apple or sunrise.
Or tax return, yeah.
Exactly. But because the patterns of those neural firings are isomorphic too, they structurally map onto events happening in the real world, meaning is born.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
But if these incredibly simple formal systems can perfectly mirror simple math, the natural question becomes, what happens when these systems scale up?
What happens when they get wildly complex?
Right. What happens when a system becomes so complex that it tries to map not just simple addition, but the entirety of reality, including itself?
Oh, man. So to explore that level of complexity, we need to leave the realm of simple letters and hyphens. We need to step back into the world of visual art and music.
We need to look at figure, ground, and the architecture of recursion. Let's bring Escher and Bach back onto the stage.
Okay, so how do they fit in here?
In Escher's art, and similarly in the musical structures of Bach's fugues, you constantly run into this interplay of foreground and background, figure and ground.
Right. The classic example of this is cutting a shape out of cookie dough.
Yes, perfect analogy.
You take a cookie cutter, let's say it's shaped like a star, and you press it into the rolled out dough. You pull the star out. That star is the figure. It is the positive space, the thing you intentionally created.
But what about the dough that's left behind on the counter?
A negative space.
Right. The question is, does that negative space also form a perfectly recognizable geometric shape? Or is it just a chaotic, random mess of holes?
In almost all real-world scenarios, the negative space is just a complete mess.
Exactly. Yeah. But Escher was a master of manipulating perception so that the negative space was just as meticulously meaningful as the positive space.
Like those bird and fish drawings.
Yes. He would draw a complex tessellation where the page is completely filled with white birds flying to the left. But if you suddenly shift your focus to the black spaces between the wings and tails of the birds...
You realize those black spaces perfectly form the shapes of fish swimming to the right.
Exactly. Both the figure and the ground are rule-bound, definable, intentional shapes.
It's beautiful art, but how does cookie dough and tessellating birds relate to formal systems and the math of the brain?
Because in a formal system, the figure is all the valid strings you can produce using the rules, is all the mathematical truths.
Okay.
The ground is all the strings you can't produce, the falsehoods. In computer science and logic, this is the difference between a recursively enumerable set and a recursive set.
Okay, wait, let me try an analogy here to make sure I understand the boundary between those sets, because recursively enumerable is a bit of a mouthful.
It is, yeah, go ahead.
So imagine I'm building an email spam filter.
Okay.
My filter has a set of rules to identify valid, important emails from my boss. It looks for specific keywords, sender addresses, whatever.
Right.
The valid emails are the figure. If my rules are perfect, I can generate a list of all the valid emails. But what about the ground? The spam.
The question is whether the spam also has a perfect set of defining rules.
Right.
If a set of rules is so clean that it can generate all the true statements, the valid emails, and the leftover statements, the spam also form a perfectly predictable rule-bound shape, then you have a clean boundary.
So you can easily write an algorithm to test if any statement is true or false?
Precisely. But other times, a set of rules generates the truth, but the negative space left behind is impossibly chaotic.
It's just a mess of cookie dough.
Exactly. You can generate the truth, but you can't define the boundaries of the false. The negative space isn't a beautiful Escher fish. It's a jagged, infinite, uncomputable mess. You literally can't write a rule for it.
And navigating that messy boundary requires a system that can manage incredibly complex, nested contexts.
Which brings us to a fundamental mechanism of human intelligence: recursion.
Recursion. It's such a buzzword, but in this context, recursion basically means things nested inside themselves, right?
Yeah, it is a process or a function that calls upon itself to complete its own execution.
Hofstadter illustrates this so beautifully in the book, using these Lewis Carroll-style dialogues between two characters, Achilles, the Greek warrior, and this very clever philosophical tortoise.
Those dialogues are fantastic.
They really are. In one of them, called The Little Harmonic Labyrinth, Achilles and the tortoise are simply walking and talking. Then they stumble upon a book.
Right.
They open the book and start reading a story out loud. But the story they are reading is about Achilles and the tortoise finding a picture and magically stepping inside that picture.
So you have the primary reality of Achilles and the tortoise.
Yep.
They read a book, which pushes them into a secondary reality. Inside that secondary reality, the characters step into a picture, pushing them into a tertiary reality.
It's just a story within a story within a story.
Think of it like a stack of trays at a cafeteria.
Ooh, I like that.
You walk in, and you're in the real world. That's the first tray on the stack. Then you open a novel. You push a new reality onto your mental stack. Now you're operating in the context of the novel.
And if a character in the novel goes to sleep and has a dream, you push another tray onto the stack. You're analyzing the dream.
Exactly. And to get back to reality, you have to pop the trays off the stack one by one. You wake up from the dream pop, you close the novel pop, you are back in your living room.
And this specific mechanism of pushing and popping context onto a stack is exactly how computer processors handle complex tasks.
It is. A program runs a subroutine, which calls another subroutine, pushing the current memory state onto a stack, and then popping it off to return to where it left off.
And what's wild is that it is also exactly how human working memory functions.
Absolutely.
Like, have you ever been at a party telling a story to a group of friends, and halfway through you go on a tangent to explain a background detail?
All the time.
And then inside that tangent, you get distracted by another tangent.
Yeah, and if suddenly you stop, look around, and say, wait, what was I originally talking about?
Exactly. You lost your place on the mental stack.
You forgot how many levels down you pushed, so you don't know how many times to pop your way back up to the primary reality. It's a stack overflow.
That's exactly it. The ability to manage this recursive mental stack is deeply tied to fluid intelligence. It's how we navigate nested contexts and hold complex arguments in our heads.
But, and this is huge, but recursion has a highly dangerous edge.
Because if a system has the mechanical ability to nest things inside itself, eventually, it might try to nest itself inside itself.
And that specific danger is what terrified mathematicians in the early 20th century. It is the exact mechanism that caused the entire structure of mathematics to nearly collapse in on itself.
Which brings us to the hubris of logic and the Gödelian bomb. This is, without a doubt, one of the most fascinating intellectual dramas in the history of science.
It really is. To appreciate the drama, we have to look at the historical stage. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, mathematicians were feeling incredibly optimistic, but also deeply nervous.
Why nervous?
Because they had discovered some very weird, unsettling paradoxes in set theory. They really wanted to clean house. The dream of the era was to build a single, unified, bulletproof formal system that could mechanize all mathematical reasoning.
They basically wanted to build a flawless typographical machine, just like our MU puzzle, that could churn out every absolute truth in the universe and cleanly reject every falsehood.
Without relying on messy human intuition at all.
Right, so what did they build?
The ultimate expression of this monumental ambition was a massive, dense, 3-volume opus called Principia Mathematica, published between 1910 and 1913 by Bertrand Russell and Alfred North Whitehead. They wanted to define typographical rules so strict, so mathematically perfect, that no paradox could ever slip through the cracks.
But the enemy Russell and Whitehead were fighting wasn't just, messy calculations. The ultimate enemy, the poison pill of all logic, is self-reference.
Self-reference.
Yeah.
It's what happens when the camera points at the monitor displaying the camera's feed.
The infinity mirror effect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the classic example in logic is the Epimenides paradox, often called the liar's paradox. It can be boiled down to a single sentence. This statement is false.
Okay, this statement is false. Let me just try to logic my way through this.
Good luck.
So, if the statement is true, then what it is saying is accurate, which means it's false.
Right.
But wait, if it's false, then it is lying about being false, which means it must actually be true.
Yep.
If it's true, it's false. If it's false, it's true. It is an infinite, one-step strange loop. It flips back and forth forever. It literally breaks my brain.
And it breaks formal systems. If a mathematical system can generate a statement that is both true and false simultaneously, the system is inconsistent. It is useless.
So Russell and Whitehead were obviously terrified of this.
Terrified. So in Principia Mathematica, they basically outlawed self-reference by decree.
Just banned it.
Banned it entirely. They created this rigid architecture called the theory of types, which acted like a strict caste system for logic.
How so?
A mathematical statement on level 1 could only talk about things on level 0. A statement on level 2 could only talk about level 1. You could never, ever have a statement talk about its own level, let alone itself.
So they built a fortress with these impenetrable typographical walls just to keep the liar's paradox out.
Exactly. And for a little while, they thought they had won. They thought mathematics was finally perfect, consistent, and complete.
But in 1931, Kurt Gödel proved them catastrophically wrong.
Oh, he completely destroyed it.
He didn't just find a tiny crack in their fortress. He proved that any fortress you could possibly build will inherently contain the seeds of its own destruction.
The way Gödel did this is so brilliant, it feels like a magic trick.
It really does, because how do you inject self-reference into a mathematical system that explicitly bans it?
You use a code.
Right.
Gödel realized that the rigid, meaningless typographical rules of Principia Mathematica were just symbols being moved around on a page, exactly like our MU puzzle.
And because they were just symbols, it could be translated into another medium.
Yes.
Let me introduce an analogy here from the book to help visualize what Gödel did, because this is wild.
Go for it. The contra cross the punctus dialogue, right?
Yes. So imagine an incredibly arrogant engineer who claims he has built the ultimate perfect stereo system. He guarantees that his record player can reproduce any sound in the universe with absolute fidelity.
Okay, a perfect record player.
Right. So the tortoise character decides to test this arrogance. He studies the exact schematics of this perfect record player. He maps out its resonant frequencies, the exact physical tolerances of its speakers, the stiffness of its stylus.
He finds its physical vulnerabilities.
Exactly. And he uses that precise engineering data to mathematically design a very specific acoustic pattern. He presses this exact pattern onto a vinyl record.
I love where this is going.
He takes the record to the engineer and puts it on the player. The record player starts spinning, the needle drops, and the speakers output a sound that happens to be the exact acoustic frequency required to vibrate the record player to pieces.
The machine literally takes itself apart trying to play the record.
The record player is destroyed by its own perfect fidelity.
And that is functionally exactly what Gödel did to Principia Mathematica.
How? Break down the math side of it.
Because the logical system was so complex and so powerful, Gödel realized he could map its symbols into numbers. This is the famous concept of Gödel numbering.
Okay, so giving every symbol a number.
Right. He gave every single typographical symbol, every P, Q, plus sign, parenthesis, and variable, a specific numeric code.
So a string of logical symbols just becomes a long sequence of numbers.
But he went deeper. He used prime factorization to turn entire equations into single, unimaginably massive numbers.
Whoa.
And here is the true stroke of genius. If statements are numbers, then the typographical rules for manipulating the statements can also be translated into arithmetic operations.
Oh. So shunting logical symbols around a page becomes isomorphic to just multiplying and dividing huge numbers.
Exactly. The system of Principia Mathematica was designed to talk about numbers. It was built to do math. But by mapping the system into numbers, Gödel made it so the system was unwittingly talking about itself.
The numbers were a Trojan horse.
Yes. When the system manipulated these numbers, it was secretly manipulating its own source code.
Gödel used this isomorphism to mathematically construct a specific massive string of logic inside the system. And on its surface, if you just looked at the ink on the page, it looked like an incredibly complex, totally boring equation about huge numbers.
But because of the Gödel numbering code, that equation had a secondary hidden meaning.
Just like our meaningless PQ system had a hidden meaning of addition.
Exactly. And the hidden meaning of Gödel's equation translated to exactly this. This statement has no proof in this system.
The Gödelian bomb, the ultimate record breaking the record player.
Yeah.
The mathematical machine tries to process it, and it just breaks. Let's think through the blast radius of this bomb. This statement has no proof in this system. What if the statement is false?
Well, if the statement is false, then the opposite must be true. It does have a proof.
Right.
But wait, if it has a proof within the system, that means the system just proved a false statement. The system is inconsistent. It tells lies.
Which means the fortress has fallen. But what if the statement is true?
If it's true, then what it says is completely accurate. It has no proof. It is a true statement that the system is completely incapable of proving.
Either way, Russell and Whitehead's dream dies.
It does. If the system can prove the statement, the system is inconsistent because it proves lies. If the system can't prove the statement, the system is incomplete because there are mathematical truths it can never reach.
And assuming we want our math to be consistent and not tell lies, we have to accept the second option. The system is inherently incomplete.
And this wasn't just a localized flaw in Principia Mathematica.
No.
Gödel proved that any formal system complex enough to do basic arithmetic will eventually become self-referential and dig its own hole. Truth transcends provability.
You cannot build a perfect enclosed box of logic.
The box will always be able to describe a truth that sits outside the box.
This is deeply unsettling, but it begs a massive question about cognitive science.
Right. How does this relate to the brain?
Yeah. If rigid mathematical logic has inherent limits, and if paradoxes can crash formal systems, how does the human brain operate? The brain operates on the physical, rigid rules of chemistry and physics. It is a formal system.
So why don't we crash?
Right. How do we avoid crashing like a computer with a blue screen of death when we hear the liar's paradox? How does flexibility emerge from absolute rigidity?
To answer that, we have to look at how hardware generates software. We have to look at the ant colony of the mind.
Oh, I love this part. To explain this, I want to bring in my absolute favorite character from the dialogues in this book, Anne Hillary.
Yes.
Anne Hillary is not a person. Aunt Hillary is a conscious, intelligent, talking ant colony.
She is the perfect metaphor for the debate between holism and reductionism.
Let me push back on this concept, just like the character Achilles does in the book.
Okay, pushback.
I've watched ants on the sidewalk. An ant is an incredibly simple, reactionary creature. It has no idea what it's doing.
Correct.
It wanders around, it drops a chemical trail, it picks up a crumb, it follows another pheromone. It is a biological automaton. It is mindless hardware.
Totally mindless.
So how can a pile of 100,000 mindless ants be conscious? How can an ant colony have a personality, let alone be capable of holding a conversation?
The trick to understanding Aunt Hillary, and your own brain, honestly, is to stop looking at the ants and start looking at the patterns.
The patterns.
Think about a single neuron in your visual cortex.
Mm.
Does that neuron know your middle name? Does it know how to ride a bicycle? No. It just fires an electrical pulse or it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
But when millions of ants or millions of neurons interact based on simple local rules, their aggregate collective behavior creates higher level structures.
Right. In the ant colony, the individual ants form teams, and those teams interact to form larger clusters, and the macroscopic movements of those clusters represent symbols.
Exactly. The individual ant is just the hardware. It is the carrier of the signal. It knows nothing about the big picture.
But the colony as a whole, Aunt Hillary, manipulates those high-level symbols to think, to react to the environment, and to plan.
Aunt Hillary is the software running on the hardware of the ants.
So if you ask an individual ant why it suddenly moved left, it would answer on the level of local physics, because I detected a specific concentration of a pheromone.
But if you ask Aunt Hillary why the colony moved left, she says, because I decided to avoid the puddle of water.
Both descriptions are entirely accurate. They're just operating on entirely different levels of description.
And this maps so beautifully onto human neurobiology. Your neurons are the ants. A single neuron doesn't know what a dog is.
Right.
But through years of experience, a massive crystallized module of neural firing patterns forms in your brain. That complex pattern represents the concept of a dog. That pattern is an active symbol.
And here is where the biological brain wildly differs from a simple, rigid computer program.
How so?
In a basic computer architecture, the rules are extensional, they're rigid. If A happens, B triggers, it is a one-to-one mapping. But in the brain, symbols are intentional. They have a property Hofstadter calls slippability.
Slippability, I love that term. What does it actually mean for a symbol to slip?
It means our symbols aren't isolated data points in a rigid database. They're an intensely interconnected fluid web.
So if I say the word dog, your primary dog symbol fires.
But that firing isn't isolated. It partially triggers your wolf symbol, your pet symbol, your fur symbol, your loyalty symbol.
And this web of activation changes dynamically depending on the context of the sentence.
This is why human beings can understand metaphors and analogies instantly. Like, if I point to a massive old gas-guzzling car and say, that car is a dinosaur, your brain doesn't literally think the car has green scales and sharp teeth.
Right. The context of the conversation allows the symbol for dinosaur to slip.
It sheds its literal biological attributes and just maps the abstract qualities of being old, obsolete, and monstrously large onto the car.
This slippability, this fluid intentionality, is the absolute core of intelligence.
Yeah.
It is what allows us to categorize the messy real world.
It allows us to tell the difference between a broad class like the abstract idea of a dog and a specific instance, like your childhood golden retriever.
Furthermore, it allows us to imagine hypothetical worlds. We can take our active symbols offline, detach them from immediate sensory input, and run simulations in our heads.
We can ask, what if I quit my job tomorrow? Or what if I had said something different in that argument?
The ants in our brain, the neurons, are organizing into macro symbols, and those symbols are constantly dancing with each other, triggering each other, based on incredibly complex, slippable contexts.
Which brings us to the conceptual climax of this entire exploration.
The grand finale.
We have all these active, slippable symbols bouncing around in the physical space of the brain, creating an internal map of the outside world. But where's the I?
Where's the observer of the math?
Exactly. We've talked extensively about Gödel, Escher, and Bach. Let's weave their structural discoveries together.
Let's do it.
Bach wrote the endlessly rising canon, a piece of music that cycles through musical keys, always seeming to modulate higher and higher in pitch, but after a series of shifts, magically ends up in the exact same key it started in, just an octave higher, ready to loop forever.
A strange loop embedded in sound and time.
Escher drew drawing hands. The picture where the left hand draws the right hand and the right hand draws the left. Each entity is bringing the other into existence simultaneously.
A strange loop embedded in visual space and hierarchy.
And Gödel wrote the universe-breaking equation that said, this statement has no proof. A rigid system of math twisting around to explicitly define its own structural limitations.
A strange loop embedded in logic and self-reference.
So how does this specific geometric and logical structure create human consciousness?
Well, let's trace the logic here. The brain is an incredibly complex formal system, right? And its primary evolutionary job is to accurately map the external world so the organism can navigate and survive.
It creates an active symbol for a tree so you don't run into it.
It creates a symbol for a tiger so you can run away from it. It creates symbols for food, for warmth, for other humans.
But the brain, doing the mapping, is housed inside a physical body, and that body is the most important central actor in this organism's universe.
Exactly. If the brain is going to make an accurate, predictive map of reality, it must have a symbol for the physical organism it is housed in.
It has to know where its arms and legs are. It has to know when its stomach is empty.
It has to predict how its own physical actions will affect the environment. Therefore, the brain constructs a self-symbol.
Just like you have a complex symbol for dog, you have an incredibly complex, deeply networked symbol for you.
Yes.
But wait, the self-symbol isn't just representing my physical arms and legs. Because my brain is also constantly monitoring my internal state, it is monitoring its own cognitive processes.
Precisely. And here is where the Gödelian vortex opens up and consciousness emerges.
Oh, this is the moment.
The self-symbol begins to monitor the activity of the other symbols in the brain. It watches the dog symbol fire, and it registers the internal state. I am thinking about a dog.
But because the self-symbol is itself a symbol made of neural firings, it has the architectural capacity to monitor itself.
It monitors itself, monitoring the other symbols. It thinks about the fact that it is thinking.
It is a system eating its own tail. You are Escher's drawing hands.
The physical hardware of the brain, the neurons, supports the software, the active symbols. But the software creates an abstract model of the hardware, the self-symbol, which in turn dictates how the hardware should behave in the future.
You are a strange loop. The I, the feeling of being a singular self, is a beautiful, necessary mathematical mirage created by a biological system that has become so dense and complex that it is forced to reflect upon itself just to function.
It is a level-crossing feedback loop. The abstract thoughts dictate the physical neural firing, and the physical neural firing dictates the abstract thoughts. The top level and the bottom level are perfectly entangled.
Okay, I have to jump in here with a major existential pushback.
I figured you would.
Because if I follow this logic to its conclusion, I get very uncomfortable.
Let's hear it.
If I am just a strange loop of software symbols, and my symbols are just made of physical neural firings, and my neurons are just biological valves governed by the strict deterministic laws of physics and chemistry.
Doesn't that mean free will is a complete illusion?
Yes. Am I just a byproduct of a biological machine? Like a passive passenger watching a movie I have absolutely no control over?
It's a very common, deeply visceral reaction to this model. But it stems from confusing the levels of the system.
Confusing the levels.
Yeah. Let's go back to Aunt Hillary, the ant colony. If you are standing in your kitchen and you ask yourself why you decided to eat a greasy cheeseburger instead of a healthy salad, you shouldn't look for the answer at the neural level.
Right.
You don't say, I ate the burger because my neuron number 45,982 in my prefrontal cortex reached its action potential and released dopamine. That statement might be physically true, but it completely misses the actual causal mechanism.
Right, because my individual neurons aren't hungry. They don't know what a cheeseburger is. I am hungry.
Exactly. You are the high-level pattern.
Yeah.
The self-symbol, embedded in this massive web of intentional slippable symbols, is what weighed the options.
My software simulated the future taste of the burger versus the crispness of the salad.
It weighed your desire for pleasure against your desire for health, and it made a choice. The system as a whole is the agent.
So to say that blind physics made the choice is to completely ignore the causal reality of the software level.
Exactly. Free will isn't about magical spirits escaping the laws of physics. It's about being a sufficiently complex physical system where your high-level abstract symbols are the primary causal drivers of your biological behavior.
You are the loop. You are the one driving.
You are the loop.
That is heavy. But it's also, I don't know, profoundly empowering when you really sit with it. It doesn't reduce my humanity to a cold, calculating machine. It elevates the biological machine to the level of magic.
It means Meaning is real, it just emerges from complexity.
And the implications of this emergence are not just philosophical musings for dorms, they are intensely practical, especially in the modern era.
We have to talk about AI.
We absolutely have to talk about AI because Gödel, Escher, Bach was published in 1979, but it spends a massive amount of time on the history, theory, and future of artificial intelligence.
It traces the dream of thinking machines from Charles Babbage and Ada Lovelace in the 1800s, who designed mechanical calculators with gears, all the way to Alan Turing and early computer programs.
Like SHRDLU, that could manipulate virtual blocks in a simulated sandbox.
The deep, enduring insight we can extract from Hofstadter's architecture is that true intelligence isn't about having a massive, rigid lookup table of rules.
Which is exactly what early AI researchers tried to do, right? They tried to brute force human intelligence using pure logic and exhaustive databases.
But as Gödel proved, pure logic is brittle. It shatters when faced with paradox or self-reference.
So what is intelligence then?
Intelligence is about having active symbols that possess slippability, the ability to fluidly adapt to nested contexts, to handle ambiguity, and to recognize patterns across entirely different domains.
Which begs the absolute biggest, most contentious question of our current moment.
Large language models.
What about ChatGPT and Claude? Are they conscious? Do they have a self-symbol?
It is the ultimate test of this theoretical framework.
On one hand, you can argue that an LLM is fundamentally a wildly complex version of the PQ system.
It is a formal system, shunting digital tokens around based on incredibly complex mathematical weights and probabilities.
It doesn't inherently know what the words mean. It doesn't experience the color red when it outputs the word red.
We, the human beings reading the output on the screen, are the ones providing the passive meaning through an isomorphism.
So under that view, the LLM is just playing the world's most advanced, mathematically sophisticated game of autocomplete. It has no inner life.
But if we look at the other hand, as we saw with the brain, when a formal system gets complex enough, meaning starts to emerge.
That's it.
The neural network of an LLM undeniably contains abstract representations of concepts. Does an LLM have active symbols? Yes. Does it have slippability? It certainly seems to. They can understand context, generate novel metaphors, and translate analogies across domains.
But does it have a strange loop?
That's the missing piece of the puzzle. To achieve true artificial general intelligence, a machine that actually thinks and feels, will it need its own strange loop?
Well, we have to program these systems, not just to predict the next word in a sequence, but to build a robust, persistent self-model that gets caught in a continuous Gödelian cycle of self-reflection.
Do we have to give the machine an internal I that constantly monitors its own internal states and explicitly recognizes itself as an autonomous actor in the world?
Wow. If Hofstadter's architectural map of consciousness is right, then the answer is yes.
AGI won't just be a bigger database with more parameters. It will require a fundamental shift in architecture.
It will require a tangled hierarchy.
It will be a machine that learns to draw itself into existence.
That is staggering. We have covered an immense amount of conceptual ground today. We've gone from mindless typographical rules and the birth of meaning through the mind-bending optical illusions of math.
Down into the reductionist ant colony of the brain and up into the dizzying recursive heights of the strange loop of consciousness.
We promise to reconstruct the hidden architecture of the mind, and I genuinely hope we've given you a mental model that changes how you view your own thoughts.
It's definitely changed how I view mine.
I want to leave you, the listener, with one final provocative thought. Something to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. The next time you look in the mirror, or the next time you simply hear yourself say the word I want you to pause for a fraction of a second and think about what is actually speaking.
Is it a ghost in the machine? Is it a localized physical module of brain tissue firing in the dark?
Or is it a strange loop? Is the you that you feel yourself to be, your personality, your fears, your loves, actually a beautiful, mathematically inevitable mirage, created by millions of mindless neurons acting in perfect contrapuntal harmony, like a Bach fugue echoing endlessly inside your own mind? Think about it. And if this journey bent your mind as much as it bent ours, you owe it to yourself to grab the actual book and dive into the labyrinth yourself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.